Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment and let me know. Now, let's get into today's story. Julian Vance existed in a world of silent, polished surfaces. The floor of his penthouse was Italian marble, a seamless expanse of gray-veined white that reflected the perpetually overcast sky pressing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. His desk was a single slab of obsidian, cool and unyielding beneath his touch. From his vantage point, 50 stories above the city, the world was a collection of muted sounds and distant geometric patterns. People were ants, traffic a slow-moving current. It was a kingdom of his own making, built with a decade of relentless ambition, and it was as empty as his own heart. He was the founder and CEO of Vance Global Holdings, a name synonymous with ruthless efficiency and astronomic growth. His face, sharp and impassive, was a regular feature in financial magazines. They called him a visionary, a titan, a kingmaker. They never mentioned the hollow echo in his chest, the ghost that walked the sterile halls of his home beside him. Her name was Ilara. Today was the 9th anniversary of her death. 9 years since the light had gone out of his world, a light he himself had helped to extinguish. He had loved her with a ferocity that scared him, a love that felt like a vulnerability in the brutal arena he was determined to conquer. So he had made a choice. He had chosen the empire over the girl, the climb over the connection. He'd broken her heart. And then, a few months later, a sterile, formal phone call from her mother had informed him she was gone. A sudden illness, the woman had said, her voice brittle with a grief that felt like an accusation. Julian had never asked for details. The guilt was a blade sharp enough without twisting it. Every year, on this day, he performed the same ritual. He would leave the gleaming tower of his success and drive his silent electric car to the one place where his polished facade cracked: Oakwood Cemetery. It was a quiet, green expanse on the edge of the city, a place of stone and memory. He found her headstone easily, its simple inscription unchanged by the passing seasons: Ilara Jenkins, beloved daughter. The words felt like a judgment. He had never been beloved enough to save her or to stay. He stood before the grave, the collar of his $1,000 coat turned up against a wind that felt colder than the air. He didn't bring flowers. His presence felt like intrusion enough. He just stood, a silent sentinel, marking a failure that no amount of success could ever erase. He was about to turn and leave, the familiar ache settling into its usual place, when he saw them. Near Ilara's grave, there were 3 children. 2 boys and a girl, huddled together under the watchful eye of an older woman with tired lines etched around her eyes and a proud, straight spine. They were all bundled in colorful, slightly worn winter coats. They couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. One of the boys was carefully placing a small, hand-picked bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the headstone. The girl was tracing the engraved letters of Ilara's name with a small, gloved finger. Julian's first thought was one of detached annoyance. Who were these people intruding on his private grief? But then the second boy, the one standing slightly apart, turned his head. His gaze, wide and curious, met Julian's across the manicured lawn. And the world stopped. It was like looking at a photograph from his own childhood. The same deep-set, serious eyes, the same stubborn set of his jaw, the same wave in his dark hair. The resemblance was not fleeting or suggestive. It was absolute. It was a perfect miniature reflection of himself staring back across a gulf of 9 years. Julian's breath caught in his throat. A cold shock, electric and terrifying, shot through him. He looked at the other 2. The girl looked up, and in her eyes he saw Ilara. The same warmth, the same almond shape. The other boy had her smile. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculation, went blank. What was this? Who were they? An elderly woman, their grandmother perhaps, noticed his fixed stare. Her expression, already weary, hardened into one of definite suspicion. She gathered the children closer, her hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. Julian couldn't move. The numbers began to churn in his head, a frantic, desperate arithmetic. Ilara had died 9 years ago. These children looked to be about 8 years old. The timeline was a brutal, perfect fit. He felt the marble floor of his penthouse dissolving beneath him, replaced by the cold, unforgiving earth of the cemetery. Could it be? Was it possible that the biggest secret of his life was one he had never even known he was keeping? He, Julian Vance, the man who controlled every variable, had missed this. The wind whipped around him, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the children's wildflowers, and for the first time in a decade, the ghost of Ilara felt less like a memory and more like a message he was only just beginning to understand. The drive back to the city was an automaton's exercise. Julian's hands were steady on the wheel, his face a mask of stone, but inside a hurricane was raging. The image of the boy's face was seared onto the inside of his eyelids. His own face replicated with impossible precision. Ilara's eyes in the little girl. A living, breathing collage of a past he thought was buried. He strode into his office, past his assistant's concerned glance, and sealed the door. The silence of the room, usually a comfort, now felt like a vacuum, amplifying the frantic roar in his ears. He stared out the window, but he didn't see the sprawling metropolis. He saw a small, worn coat and a hand tracing a name on cold granite. Regret was an old friend, but this new feeling was different. It was sharper, more visceral. It was the terror of a colossal, life-altering ignorance. He had mourned Ilara's death as the end of a chapter. What if it had been a beginning? What if, while he was building his empire brick by soulless brick, a part of him, a part of them, had been growing up in the world without him? His first call was to a man named Arthur Croft, his personal attorney for a decade. His second was to a private investigator Arthur recommended, a man named Henderson, who specialized in absolute discretion. "I need you to find out everything you can about 3 children and an older woman," Julian said, his voice clipped, betraying none of the chaos inside him. He described them in meticulous detail, gave the location of the cemetery, the time of the encounter. "I want to know their names, their ages, where they live. I want to know about the woman. And I want to know their connection to Ilara Jenkins, who is buried at that plot." "And the nature of your interest, Mr. Vance?" Henderson's voice was dry, professional. "Personal," Julian bit out. "And above all, discreet. They are not to be approached. They are not to know they are being watched. Is that clear?" The weight was agony. Julian tried to work. He stared at spreadsheets detailing billion-dollar mergers, but the numbers swam before his eyes, rearranging themselves into the number 3. 3 children. He sat in board meetings, his executives debating market projections, while his mind replayed the boy's turn of the head, the girl's gentle touch on the headstone. He felt like a fraud in his own life. The man who prided himself on knowing everything had been blind to the one thing that might have mattered. 3 days later, Henderson's report landed on his desk in a plain manila envelope. Julian's hand trembled slightly as he opened it. The names were there in stark black and white: Elias, Amara, and Caleb Jenkins. Age, 8 years old. Triplets. The word hit him like a physical blow. Not 1 child, 3. The scale of his ignorance, of his loss, tripled in an instant. They lived with their maternal grandmother, Martha Jenkins, in a small 2-bedroom apartment in the city's South Borough, a world away from his glass tower. The report contained grainy surveillance photos of their building, a modest brick structure with peeling paint around the window frames. There were photos of the children playing in a nearby public park, their laughter visible even in the silent, still images. Elias, the one who looked so much like him, was climbing a slide. Amara was on the swings, her face tilted toward the sun. Caleb was sitting on a bench reading a book, a look of intense concentration on his face. The most damning page was a copy of their birth certificates. Mother, Elara Jenkins. Father, unknown. And then, the date of death for Elara, 6 days after the triplets were born. The cause was listed as a postpartum embolism, a complication from childbirth. She hadn't died of a sudden random illness. She had died giving birth to his children. The air left Julian's lungs. The sterile office, his entire world, seemed to tilt on its axis. The polite, brittle lie Martha had told him on the phone all those years ago was not just a kindness to a stranger, it was a shield. It was a guard against the man who had broken her daughter's heart and disappeared. She had protected Elara's memory from him, and she had protected the children. He spent hours just looking at the photographs. He saw their world so different from his. It wasn't a world of polished marble and silent servants. It was a world of scuffed knees, shared swings, and a grandmother's weary but loving vigilance. He saw a picture of Martha walking them home from school, holding all three of their hands, her face a mask of tired determination. She was doing it all alone. For 8 years she had been doing the job that should have been his. The rage he felt was directed entirely at himself, at his youthful arrogance, at the cold ambition that had made him so unreachable. Elara had tried to tell him. He knew she had. In the weeks after their breakup, he'd ignored her calls, deleting the voicemails without listening, telling his assistant he was unavailable. He had built a wall around himself to numb the pain of their separation, and in doing so, he had locked out the most important news of his life. He had to get closer. Observing from a distance was no longer enough. The report was clinical. He needed to feel it, to see it with his own eyes. The next day, he drove his unremarkable sedan, the one he kept for anonymous errands, to the South Borough. He parked across the street from the park in the photos, and he watched. He saw them tumble out of an old car with Martha, their backpacks bouncing. He saw Elias instigate a game of tag, his movements quick and athletic. He saw Amara hang back, sketching in a small notebook she produced from her pocket. He saw Caleb sit with his grandmother, pointing out things in his book, his small face serious. He watched them for over an hour, a ghost at the edge of their lives. He felt an ache in his chest so profound it was almost physical. It was a longing, not for what he had lost, but for what he had never known he had. He was a father, and his children were right there, 100 feet away, living a life he had no part in. A water bottle, discarded by Elias as he ran past, lay near a bin. Julian's eyes fixed on it. A plan, cold and desperate, began to form in his mind. He needed more than a report, he needed proof. He needed certainty before he either shattered their world or walked away forever. Henderson was efficient. Retrieving the discarded water bottle from the park was a simple task for his operative. Getting a sample of Julian's DNA was even simpler. The wait for the lab results felt like a lifetime compressed into 72 hours. Julian didn't sleep. He paced the length of his penthouse, the city lights a blur of indifferent glitter below. His entire future, the very definition of who he was being decided in a sterile laboratory across town. The call came on a Thursday afternoon as a cold rain began to streak down the vast windows of his office. "The results are in, Mr. Vance," Henderson said, his voice as neutral as ever. "I'm sending the file to your secure server now." Julian's hand was slick on the mouse as he clicked the file open. It was a simple PDF, a clinical document full of genetic markers and statistical analysis. But at the bottom, one line stood out in bold type. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The numbers seemed to burn into the screen, 99.99%. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. The world he had known for 35 years, a world of solitary ambition, of calculated success, of lonely grief, fractured and fell away. He was a father. He had 3 children, 3 pieces of his heart, of Ilara's heart, were living and breathing in a world that had never known his name. Henderson had also managed to acquire a copy of the letter Ilara had left for her mother. It was scanned and included in the file. Julian opened it, his heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against his ribs. The script was Ilara's, familiar and flowing, filled with a gentle grace that he remembered so vividly it hurt. My dearest Mama, if you are reading this, it means I can no longer be there to say it myself. Please don't be sad for too long. I know you, and I know your strength. That strength is what I'm counting on now, for my babies. I need to tell you about their father. It's Julian Vance. I know what you must think of him, and I know he hurt me. But, Mama, you have to understand. The boy I loved was sweet and full of dreams. The man he became, he got lost. He was building a kingdom for himself because he felt he had nothing. I tried to tell him about the pregnancy after we parted ways. I called, I left messages, but he had already shut the door. He was climbing so fast, and I think he was afraid to look down, afraid of anything that might make him fall. I don't believe he is a bad man, just a lost one. I chose not to force my way into his life. I didn't want my children to be seen as a burden or an obstacle to his ambition. That was my choice, and maybe it was a foolish one, but I made it out of love. Please just love them for me. Tell them about me. Tell them I wanted them more than anything in the world. And if one day Julian ever finds his way back from being lost, don't meet him with anger. Just show him his children. Maybe seeing them will be the map he needs to find his way home. All my love forever. Ilara Julian leaned forward, his head in his hands, the silent office bearing witness to the tremor that racked his body. Each word was a fresh wound, a lost one. She had understood him better than he understood himself. She hadn't seen him as a monster, but as something more tragic, a man who had chosen the wrong path. And she had left him a map. A map with 3 names, Elias, Amara, and Caleb. The time for observation was over. The time for hiding in the shadows, a ghost at the edge of their lives, was done. He had the proof. He had the truth. And now he had a duty that eclipsed every deal, every acquisition, every last brick in his empty empire. Through his lawyer, Arthur, he requested a meeting with Martha Jenkins. The official pretense was a matter regarding Ilara's estate, a thin veil they both knew was a lie. Martha agreed to see him, her voice on the phone tight with a resignation that sounded like she had been expecting this day for 8 years. He drove himself to the South Bistro, this time not to watch from a distance, but to cross the threshold. The apartment building was even more worn up close. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs, the air smelling of fried onions and old wood. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was more terrified now than he had been before any boardroom showdown. He knocked. The door opened, and Martha Jenkins stood before him. She was smaller than he'd imagined, but her presence was formidable. Her eyes, the same warm brown as Amara's, were filled with a weary, decades-old pain and a simmering resentment. "Mr. Vance," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Jenkins," he replied, his own voice sounding hollow. "Thank you for seeing me." She just nodded and stepped back, allowing him into her home. The apartment was small, but it was not sterile like his penthouse. It was filled with life. Children's drawings were taped to the walls. A pile of colorful building blocks was in one corner. The sofa was draped with a handmade quilt. The air smelled of cinnamon and laundry soap. It was a home, a real home. "I know why you're here," she said, her arms crossed over her chest. "I saw you at the cemetery. I always wondered if you'd show up one day." I, I didn't know, Julian stammered, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. I swear to you, Martha, I never knew about them. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. He didn't show her the DNA test. That felt too clinical, too cold. Instead, he showed her the dates on his call logs from 9 years ago, the proof of his self-imposed isolation. And then he showed her his copy of Alara's letter. Her composure finally cracked. A single tear traced a path through the weary lines on her cheek. She always saw the best in people, she whispered, her voice thick, even when they didn't deserve it. I know I don't, Julian said, his own voice breaking. I know I can never get back the years I've missed. I can't undo the pain I caused her or the burden I left you to carry. I'm not here to take them. I'm not here to disrupt their lives. I need to know them. Please, let me be a part of their lives. Let me help. Let me be their father. Martha studied him for a long, silent moment. She looked from his expensive sweat to the raw, pleading desperation in his eyes. She was seeing past the billionaire, past the man who had abandoned her daughter, and was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the lost man Alara had written about. They're at school, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. They'll be home in an hour. You can wait. We'll see how it goes. But you should know, Mr. Vance, they are my entire world. If you hurt them, you'll have to answer to me. Julian nodded, a wave of profound, terrifying relief washing over him. I understand, he said, and he did. He finally understood. The first meeting was a study in awkwardness. The triplets came bursting through the door, shedding backpacks and jackets, their voices filling the small apartment with energy. They stopped dead when they saw Julian sitting stiffly on their sofa. Kids, this is a friend of your mother's, Martha said, her voice gentle but strained. His name is Julian. 3 pairs of identical brown eyes fixed on him. Elias, the bold one, looked him up and down with open suspicion. Amara, the artist, peered at him with a shy curiosity, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Caleb, the quiet reader, simply watched him, his expression unreadable. You knew our mom? Amara asked, her voice a small whisper. Julian's throat felt tight. Yes, he managed to say. A long time ago. She was wonderful. He tried to talk to them, but the words felt clumsy and foreign in his mouth. He asked about school, about their favorite subjects. He was used to commanding boardrooms, to negotiating 9-figure deals. He had no idea how to talk to an 8-year-old, or 3 of them. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long silences. He was an alien in their world, a man in a tailored suit who didn't fit on their lived-in sofa. He began visiting regularly, always under Martha's watchful eye. He'd bring them gifts, expensive, impersonal things at first, like tablets and designer toys. They were polite, but the gifts sat mostly untouched. He was trying to buy his way in, and it wasn't working. The shift happened on a Saturday afternoon in the park. It was a crisp autumn day, and he'd offered to take them so Martha could have a few hours to herself. She had agreed, hesitantly. He was pushing Amara on the swing, Elias was chasing squirrels, and Caleb was sitting on a bench, a little breathless, his ever-present book in his lap. Suddenly Caleb began to cough, a dry, tight, wheezing cough that quickly grew more frantic. His small face went pale, his eyes wide with panic. My puffer, he gasped, pointing a shaking finger at his backpack, which was on the ground several feet away. Julian's mind went into overdrive. The paralysis of the last few weeks vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, primal focus. He scooped Caleb up, his small body frighteningly light, while simultaneously grabbing the backpack. Elias and Amara ran over, their faces masks of fear. It's okay, Julian said, his voice calm and authoritative, in a way he hadn't managed before. He found the inhaler, shook it, and helped Caleb take 2 deep puffs. The wheezing subsided slightly, but his breathing was still ragged. Julian didn't hesitate. "Elias, Amara, hold my hands. We're going to the car, right now." He carried Caleb, his other hand firmly gripping the hands of the other two. He didn't call his driver. He strapped them into his own sedan and drove, with perfect calm, to the nearest hospital emergency room. He used his name and influence not with arrogance, but with a desperate efficiency, cutting through the red tape to get Caleb seen immediately. He sat with them in the small examination room. Caleb was on the bed with a nebulizer mask over his face, his breathing slowly returning to normal. Elias and Amara were huddled on a chair, their eyes wide and scared. Julian sat on the floor between them, one hand on Elias's knee, the other on Amara's arm. "He's going to be okay," he said softly. "You were both very brave." "Is it our fault?" Amara whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "We were running too much." "No," Julian said firmly, looking her right in the eye. "No, honey. It's not your fault at all. This is just something that happens sometimes. And we knew just what to do." When Martha arrived, frantic with worry, she found them like that. A strange, makeshift family huddled together in the sterile, beeping room. She saw the look on Julian's face, not the impassive mask of a billionaire, but the raw, naked concern of a father. She saw the way her other two grandchildren were leaning into him, seeking comfort. And in that moment, she knew Alara had been right. The lost man was starting to find his way. That night, after Caleb was discharged and they were all back at the apartment, Amara tugged on Julian's sleeve. "Julian," she said, "can you tell me a story about Mom, a real one?" Julian's heart clenched. He sat down on the floor with them, the three of them gathering around him. "She loved to draw," he said, his voice thick with memory. "Just like you, Amara. She would carry a sketchbook everywhere. She said she was collecting moments. She once drew a picture of a grumpy-looking squirrel in the park because she said he looked like he had important business to attend to. She made everything feel magical." They listened, captivated. For the first time, he wasn't a stranger or an intruder. He was a bridge to the mother they had never known. As he spoke, sharing a piece of Alara he had kept locked away for so long, he felt a profound shift inside him. The hollow echo in his chest was being replaced by something new, something warm. It was the terrifying, wonderful, and undeniable feeling of love. Julian's life began to reorient itself around a new gravitational center. Board meetings were rescheduled to accommodate parent-teacher conferences. Black-tie galas were skipped in favor of pizza nights on Martha's floor. His obsidian desk gathered a fine layer of dust while he learned how to assemble a complex Lego castle. The sterile silence of his penthouse was now routinely shattered by the sound of three small voices on video calls, excitedly telling him about their day. His executive team was bewildered. His COO, Isabel Croft, was particularly unnerved. Isabel was a woman carved from the same ambitious stone as the old Julian. Sharp, brilliant, and impeccably dressed, she had been his right hand for 7 years. She had weathered his moods, anticipated his strategies, and made herself indispensable. In her own calculated way, she considered herself the heir apparent, not just to the company, but to the empty seat beside him in his life. She noticed the changes immediately, the slight smile that touched his lips when he looked at his phone, the new softness in his eyes, the inexplicable last-minute cancellations. He was distracted. Human. And to Isabel, human was a liability. "That European merger is at a critical juncture, Julian," she said one afternoon, standing before his desk. She held a tablet displaying the declining stock price of the target company. "Their board is getting nervous. They need a show of confidence. We need you in Zurich front and center." "I can't next week," Julian said, without looking up from the drawing Amara had made for him. A portrait of the 5 of them, stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. He'd had it framed. It sat where a prestigious business award used to be. "Can't," Isabel's eyebrow arched. "Julian, this is the deal of the decade. Your legacy deal. What could possibly be more important?" He finally looked up at her, and the warmth in his eyes was something she had never seen before. It made her deeply uneasy. "I have a school play to attend," he said simply. "Elias is tree number 3. Isabel's perfectly manicured smile tightened. A school play. A tree. She had dedicated the best years of her life to helping him build an empire, and he was putting it all at risk for a tree. The condescension in her mind was quickly replaced by a cold, sharp suspicion. This wasn't just a whim. Something fundamental had changed. She did what she did best. She gathered intelligence. Using a discreet security contractor loyal to her, she had Julian followed. It didn't take long. The report came back with pictures that made her blood run cold. Julian, the titan of industry, pushing a little girl on a swing. Julian, kneeling to tie a little boy's shoe. Julian, standing on a modest porch, talking with an old woman. 3 children, 1 woman, a secret family. To Isabel, this wasn't a heartwarming story of reconciliation. It was a threat, a messy, unpredictable variable that endangered everything she had worked for. These children, this woman, they were a stain on the pristine brand of Julian Vance. They were a link to a past he had shed, a commonness that had no place in their world of glass towers and global finance. They were a weakness. And Isabel Croft had always known how to exploit a weakness. The European merger was with a century-old Swiss conglomerate run by a deeply conservative, patriarchal family. They valued tradition, legacy, and above all, image. A scandal was their worst nightmare. Isabel knew this. She made a call to a journalist she kept on a short leash, a man who traded in whispers and reputations. She didn't give him the whole truth. She twisted it, shaped it into a weapon. "The great Julian Vance has a skeleton in his closet," she'd purred into the phone. "A big one. It seems he's had a secret family hidden away in the slums for years. Just imagine. The reclusive billionaire, living a double life. The mother, now conveniently deceased. How will the market react to that kind of deception?" She knew exactly how they would react, and she knew exactly who would be there to help Julian pick up the pieces when his messy little secret blew up in his face. She would be the one to guide him back to sanity, back to the cold, clean world of power where he belonged. She would save him from himself. The explosion came 2 days later. It wasn't on the front page of a major paper, but somewhere far more damaging. A notorious online financial gossip column read religiously by everyone on Wall Street and in the boardrooms of Europe. "Vance's secret heirs, billionaire's hidden family emerges, rocks legacy deal." The article was vicious. It painted Julian as a manipulative monster who had hidden his illegitimate children in poverty for 8 years, only acknowledging them now that they had somehow been discovered. It hinted at legal battles, at a sordid past, at a character flaw that called his entire business judgment into question. The pictures the columnist used were grainy and invasive, one of Julian entering Martha's humble apartment building, another of the children playing in their rundown park. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Vance Global stock dipped 3% in pre-market trading. Arthur, his lawyer, was fielding calls from their frantic PR department, and then came the call from Zurich. "Julian, what is the meaning of this?" It was Heinrich Müller, the stern, elderly patriarch of the Swiss firm. "This scandal. Our partners are aghast. A man's character is reflected in his business. We require an immediate explanation. You will be on the first flight to Zurich." We meet tomorrow morning." Julian stood in his penthouse, the phone still pressed to his ear, and looked at his calendar. The next day wasn't just another day. It was the triplets' 9th birthday, the first birthday he would have been a part of, the first time he would hear them blow out candles and make a wish. He had promised. He had promised he would be there to help Martha set up the party. A storm had begun to brew outside, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray. Rain lashed against the glass, mirroring the tempest in his soul. The deal, his legacy, everything he had worked for a decade. The man he used to be screamed at him to get on the plane, to manage the crisis, to cut away the liability, to choose the empire. His office door slid open, and Isabel walked in. She was dressed in a severe, dark gray suit, her expression a careful blend of concern and control. "I've already chartered a jet for you," she said, her voice smooth and reassuring. "It's on standby. I've drafted a preliminary statement, a full denial pending a thorough internal investigation. We'll call it a malicious fabrication, a shakedown. We distance you from them completely, cauterize the wound. You go to Zurich, you reassure Heinrich, and this all goes away. You have to choose, Julian. It's the company, your entire life's work, or them." She was framing it as the ultimate choice, the one he had made once before when he had chosen ambition over Ilara. She was betting he would make it again. He looked at her perfectly composed face, her eyes glittering with the thrill of the crisis, of the power play. She was the ghost of his past, the embodiment of the cold, empty world he had built. Then his eyes fell to his desk. Lying next to the billion-dollar merger prospectus was a single handmade card. It was made of construction paper, and on the front, in shaky crayon, Amara had drawn the 5 of them again. This time, they were all wearing party hats. Inside, in the distinct handwriting of 3 different children, it said, "Happy birthday to us. We're so glad you're here. Love, Elias, Amara, and Caleb." He picked up the card. The flimsy paper felt more real, more substantial in his hand than the weighty legal documents beside it. He thought of Elias's cocky grin, Caleb's quiet intensity, Amara's gentle soul. He thought of their laughter filling Martha's small apartment. He thought of Ilara's letter, of her hope that seeing them would be his map home. The choice wasn't a choice at all. The storm raged outside, a furious symphony of wind and rain against the glass walls of the penthouse. Julian looked from Isabel's expectant face to the simple, crayon-drawn card in his hand. A profound calm settled over him, silencing the hurricane in his mind. He finally knew the way home. He turned his back on Isabel and picked up his phone. He didn't call the airport. He called Heinrich Müller in Zurich. "Heinrich," he said, his voice clear and steady, devoid of the panic the old Julian would have felt. "I won't be coming to Zurich, not tomorrow, not ever, to discuss this." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Julian, do you understand what you are saying? This deal is on the line." "I understand perfectly," Julian continued, his gaze drifting to the window, to the city he had once wanted to conquer. "The story in that column is a disgusting distortion of the truth. The truth is this: I recently discovered that I have 3 of the most wonderful children in the world. I was not a part of their lives for the first 8 years, a failure I will spend the rest of my life making up for. They are not a liability. They are not a scandal. They are my children. They are my legacy. And tomorrow is their 9th birthday, and I will be with them. If that is incompatible with the values of your company, then I respectfully withdraw my offer. Some things are not for sale." He ended the call before Heinrich could respond. The silence that followed was heavy. Isabel stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed. "You just threw away billions of dollars for them." Julian finally turned to face her, and the warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by an arctic cold she had never seen directed at her. "No, Isabel, I've just found it." He took a step closer. "I know it was you. I know you leaked the story. You thought you were protecting the Empire, but this was never about the company. This was about you. You saw them as a threat to your position, to your twisted fantasy of what our life would be." Isabel's composure shattered. "I did it for you," she spat, her voice rising. "To save you from this mess, to protect what we built." "You built nothing," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You helped me stack bricks. I was the one who was lost, and you were happy to keep me that way because it served you. You represent everything I am leaving behind. The emptiness, the ambition that eats your soul, the belief that a person's worth is measured by their stock price. You are fired, Isabel. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. I want you out of my company and out of my life." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a man she no longer recognized. The cold, controllable Titan was gone. In his place was a father, fierce and protective. Defeated, she said nothing. She simply turned and walked out of his office for the last time, leaving him alone with the sound of the rain and the weight of the handmade card in his hand. He didn't spare her another thought. He picked up his coat and walked out, leaving the penthouse, the company, the entire glittering, empty kingdom behind without a single backward glance. He had a party to get to. He arrived at Martha's apartment soaked from the rain, holding 3 clumsily wrapped presents under his arm. When the door opened, the warm air, smelling of chocolate cake and happiness, enveloped him. The triplets ran to him, their faces lighting up. "You came!" Elias shouted. "I promised, didn't I?" Julian said, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across his face. He looked over their heads at Martha, who was standing by the small kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She was smiling too, a look of profound relief and pride in her eyes. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. He was one of them now. He was home. Later, as the 3 children gathered around a small cake blazing with 9 candles, they all looked at him. "You make a wish, too," Amara insisted. Julian closed his eyes. He didn't wish for success, or wealth, or power. He wished for more days just like this one, for scraped knees and crayon drawings and the sound of laughter in a small, warm room. As they blew out the candles, Caleb, the quiet one, looked up at him. "Dad," he said, the word new and tentative, "can you help me with the first piece of cake?" The word hung in the air, more valuable than any stock, more powerful than any title. Dad. Julian's eyes welled with tears as he knelt, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "Of course, son," he whispered. "Of course I can." 1 year later. The sun shone brightly on a sprawling green lawn. A beautiful but unpretentious house stood behind it, a home filled with light and laughter. It was a bridge between 2 worlds, a place with enough space for children to run, and a warmth that had finally seeped into Julian's own soul. He was pushing Amara and Elias on a large swing set, one he had spent 2 weekends building himself, the instruction manual spread out on the grass like a battle plan. Caleb was sitting nearby with Martha on a porch swing, reading to her from a chapter book. Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his new COO. The Swiss deal had, against all odds, been resurrected. Heinrich Muller, impressed by Julian's integrity, had come back to the table on Julian's terms. It was a victory, but as Julian pushed the swing higher, hearing his children's delighted shrieks, he realized the deal didn't feel like the monumental achievement it once would have. It was just business. His real legacy was right here, in this sun-drenched yard. It was in Elias's competitive spirit, Amara's artistic soul, and Caleb's quiet wisdom. It was in Martha's steady presence, a testament to a mother's enduring strength. It was in the memory of Alara, a love that had, in the end, created all of this. He stopped the swing, and Amara and Elias jumped off, running to tackle him in a clumsy, joyous hug. He fell back onto the soft grass, all three of them piling on top of him, a tangle of limbs and laughter. He looked up at the endless blue sky, his heart full. The lost man was finally completely home.